The cold night had deepened as Rhovan descended from the iron spine into the valley below. The jagged peaks loomed like ancient sentinels, their icy breath lingering in the air. The scent of blood and steel still clung to his senses, but it was the oppressive silence that weighed on him now. The kind of silence that told him the world was watching, waiting to see what would emerge from the darkness. Rhovan moved with the purposeful stride of a predator, his fur-lined cloak billowing behind him. His sword, freshly cleaned of the warlock's foul blood, rested at his side, sheathed but never far from his hand. The weight of it was a familiar comfort, one he'd grown accustomed to over years of battle and survival. But tonight, something felt different. The air was thick with tension, as if the very land beneath his feet was whispering secrets he could not yet decipher. As he reached the lower slopes, the landscape began to change. The pristine snow of the mountains gave way to frozen mud and jagged rocks. The land here was scarred, torn apart by years of war. Rhovan could see the remnants of battlefields scattered across the valley, broken weapons, shattered shields, and the skeletal remains of those who had fought and died in vain. But the true horrors of Thar were not to be found in the remnants of past battles. No, the true horrors were the living, those who had survived the endless conflict only to become twisted by it. And as Rhovan continued his journey, he encountered the first of them. It was a small band of survivors, huddled around a meager fire in the ruins of what might once have been a village. Their faces were gaunt, hollowed by hunger and despair. They wore rags for clothing, barely enough to fend off the biting cold. Yet, despite their pitiful appearance, there was a ferocity in their eyes, a desperate need to survive that mirrored Rhovan's own. One of them, a woman with sharp features and eyes that burned with determination, stepped forward as Rhovan approached. She held a crude spear in her hands, the tip fashioned from a jagged piece of metal. "State your business," she demanded, her voice rough from the cold and the weight of countless hardships. Rhovan stopped a few paces away, his gaze meeting hers with an intensity that made her grip the spear tighter. "I'm just passing through," he replied, his voice low and measured, "looking for a warm fire and a place to rest." The woman studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowing as if trying to see through the layers of fur and leather to the man beneath. Finally, she nodded and gestured toward the fire. "You can share our fire for the night, but don't think for a moment we trust you." Rhovan gave a curt nod in return and moved to the fire, lowering himself to the ground with a weary sigh. The warmth was a welcome relief from the chill that had seeped into his bones. He glanced around at the others, men and women who had seen too much, lost too much. They were warriors, survivors, like him, but there was something else in their eyes. Something darker. The woman who had spoken earlier sat across from him, her gaze never leaving his. "I'm Kelra," she said finally, her voice softer now that the initial tension had passed. "Rhovan," he replied, meeting her gaze with equal intensity. Kelra nodded, as if she had expected nothing less. "What brings you to Thar, Rhovan? It's not a place for the faint of heart." "I'm looking for something," he said, his voice guarded. "Something that might help me survive what's to come." Kelra raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And what might that be?" "A weapon," Rhovan said simply. "Something that can kill a warlock." At that, a murmur rippled through the group, and Kelra's eyes widened slightly. "Warlocks are not to be trifled with. You've had dealings with one?" Rhovan's jaw tightened as memories of the battle and the iron spine flashed through his mind. "More than just dealings," he said grimly. "I killed one." The silence that followed was thick with disbelief. The others exchanged uneasy glances, and Kelra leaned forward, her expression a mixture of curiosity and caution. If that's true, then you're either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Perhaps both, Rhovan replied, his tone flat. Kelra studied him for a moment longer, then leaned back, her expression softening. If you're looking for a weapon that can kill a warlock, you won't find it here in this valley. But there are rumors. Rumors of an artifact hidden deep within the kingdom of Thar. A blade, they say, forged by ancient magic, capable of cutting through even the most powerful of spells. Rhovan's interest piqued. Where can I find this blade? Kelra hesitated, glancing at the others before answering. It won't be easy. The artifact is said to be hidden in the heart of Thar, in a place called the Shadow Tower. It's an ancient fortress, long abandoned, but they say it's guarded by more than just stone walls. Rhovan nodded slowly, digesting the information. The Shadow Tower. It sounded like the kind of place that could either make him stronger or kill him. But if the blade was there, it was a risk he was willing to take. I'll need a guide, he said, his gaze locking on to Kelra's. Someone who knows the land, who can get me there. Kelra met his gaze without flinching. I can take you, she said, her voice firm. But I'll warn you now, Rhovan Thar is a place of shadows and secrets. It will test you in ways you've never imagined. I've been tested before, Rhovan replied, his voice cold and determined. And I'm still standing. Kelra nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Then we leave at first light. As the night wore on, Rhovan sat by the fire, his mind turning over the possibilities and dangers that lay ahead. The kingdom of Thar was a place of nightmares, but it also held the key to his survival. If he could find the blade, if he could wield it, then perhaps he could carve out his own destiny in this brutal world. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows on the faces of the survivors around him. They were warriors, like him, but they were also something more. They were the last remnants of a broken kingdom, clinging to life in a world that had forgotten them. And in the morning, they would guide him into the heart of that darkness. As Rhovan stared into the flames, he felt the weight of the coming journey settle on his shoulders. The shadows of Thar were deep and dangerous, but he would face them head on. Because in this world, survival was the only thing that mattered. And Rhovan intended to survive.